Hello and welcome to Frontline Videos. I am Nirupama Subramanian. The big news today from Sri Lanka is that the Adani Green Energy company has withdrawn from two wind energy farms that it was going to develop in the northern and northwestern region of the island, namely in Mannar and Pooneryn. And the reasons that it has given in a press statement are that the project was not financially viable anymore. And this follows on the back of an announcement last month that the government of President Anura Kumara Dissanayake was going to set up another committee to renegotiate the power purchasing agreement that had been negotiated by the previous government. The company put out a statement that it seeks to respectfully withdraw from further engagement with the renewable energy wind project and two transmission projects in Sri Lanka. With me today to discuss this issue is Mr. Rohan Pethiyagoda. He is a well-known scientist and a public policy advocate in Sri Lanka. And he has been an opponent of the project of this wind farm in north and northwestern Sri Lanka on the grounds of both its environmental impact and its the lack of transparency in the deal when it was concluded in 2021, pardon me. Mr. Pethiyagoda, welcome to Frontline Videos.
Thank you.
So what's your first response to this big announcement from Adani Green?
Well, both relief and disappointment, in a sense. I'm relieved that what was manifestly a project that was far from transparent has been annulled. It's disappeared now for the moment. I'm disappointed because Sri Lanka loses the opportunity of gaining 2,000 gigawatt hours of wind energy, renewable energy very soon. So I've got mixed feelings about this.
But I'm a bit confused here. So you did not want the project to go ahead in its present form. Is that what you're saying? But you were not opposed to the project as such, to the entire project as such. You'd have welcomed the project had it been negotiated transparently, had the power purchase agreement been in Sri Lanka's favor. Is that what you say?
Yes, and also the environment. So let's just look at this holistically. Yeah. The project involved two wind farms, one on the island of Mannar and another one at Pooneryn, which should have jointly produced about 2,000 gigawatt hours of energy per year. Hugely valuable and immensely important for Sri Lanka. The project has been in the pipeline since about 2019, since the time of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The final price that was approved by the Sri Lankan cabinet under the leadership of President Wickremesinghe on the 6th of May last year, it's a long time now, was 8.26 US cents per kilowatt hour. Now that is almost 3 times the price that is usually tendered in India for a kilowatt hour of wind energy. And Mannar is a very successful and lucrative wind energy source, one of the best wind energy resources in South Asia. So we should have been looking at a far lower cost. But of course, as you know, Sri Lanka has gone through a massive economic collapse in the last few years. Of course, the country has recovered beautifully in the last 3 years since 2022, but still we're not out of the doldrums. And because of that, there would be a risk premium attached to Sri Lanka, but a risk premium of 300% is ridiculous. So that was my first objection, the price that we're being asked to pay. So if we were asked to pay a price that's, for example, 50% above the going rate in India for 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I think that would have been reasonable. That's my first objection. The second objection is that there has been no transparency. The usual way in which power is purchased in Sri Lanka is through a tender process. We've had other tenders for wind power in the Mannar region. And those have yielded a price of between 4.5 and 5 cents. So recently we had an award by this present government of Nirupama Subramanian for 50 megawatt plant, relatively small plant, bearing in mind that the Adani plants are about 250 megawatts. For a 50 megawatt plant, a price of 4.65 US cents. Now, that's in the kind of ballpark that I would consider relevant. But considering that the Adani plants are 5-10 times the size of that 50 megawatt plant, we should have got the economies of scale kicking in and got an even lower price from Adani. So we were paying far too high a price. Now, can this be pinned on Adani? No, because it takes two to tango. There would have been parties in the Sri Lankan government that were complicit in negotiating this higher price. And so really, I can't hold that against the Adani Corporation. Many people paint me, and I must address this, as being anti-Adani or even anti-India. I am neither. Sri Lanka needs India for its future development. There's no question about that. We also need investors like Adani to come in and invest in this market. We need their dollar investments here. So there's no question of our revoking either India or companies like Adani from investing here. We need them desperately. So anyway, that's my second objection, the lack of transparency. We should have gone into this through a tender process where bids could have been called, transparently evaluated and awarded to the most attractive one for the people of Sri Lanka. Thirdly, there is the environment. Mannar Island is a key to the South Asian bird migration corridor. There are millions of birds that migrate through this area every year. They come through the peninsula of India and into Sri Lanka during the winter, and then they return northwards during the summer. Now, there would be some environmental consequence from a wind energy project on Mannar Island. There already is one. There are two, in fact, and these have been shown to have certain consequences, but manageable consequences. Our objection to this Adani project on the grounds of environment was simply that the procedure wasn't followed. Sri Lanka has environmental rules, environmental impact assessments, and so on. Now, if those are conducted properly and the Central Environment Authority signs off on those impact assessments and approves the project, there would be no problem. But in this present project, the Central Environment Authority refrained from approving it on environmental grounds. And the government was still trying to push it through. I speak of the former government of Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, not the present government. So on all those three grounds, I think there was an adequate foundation to dismiss this particular project in this manifestation. The project also involved telling some untruths. From the outset, the Sri Lanka governments of Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Ranil Wickremesinghe maintained that this was somehow a government-to-government project between the government of India and Sri Lanka. However, the government of India, as far as anyone knows, has never been associated with this project.
But isn't it, just to interrupt you here for a second, did the head of the Ceylon Electricity Board not tell a parliamentary committee 2 years ago that he was told by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa that this was a project in which Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India was personally involved, and that he should actually clear it immediately. And of course, the gentleman in question resigned a couple of days after this statement from his position. So it does seem that at least going by the statement that, if I recall, his name was Mr. Ferdinando. Going by Mr. Ferdinando's statement, there seemed to have been some kind of pressure from Delhi.
Yes. So what Mr. Ferdinando told the Parliamentary Committee on Public Enterprises was that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had told him that he had a personal request from Prime Minister Modi, asking that this project be given to Adani. Mr. Ferdinando said that in Parliament, he made that statement, And the very same evening, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa issued a statement denying that he had ever said such a thing to Mr. Ferdinand. He distanced himself from that statement. Obviously, he was embarrassed. And because the president effectively called Mr. Ferdinando a liar, he resigned a couple of days later, because it's untenable for a senior government official to be in office if the president is saying that he is a teller of lies, of fibs.
That's right.
So that was the background there. But there's been no official document, despite the Minister of Power and Energy, for example, the previous Minister of Power and Energy, Mr. Kanchana Vijayasekara, said in Parliament on numerous occasions that this was a government-to-government, a G-to-G project. But no document has ever been cited by anyone to substantiate that claim. There appears to be no document between the government of India and Sri Lanka, and such documents are usually talked about publicly. They're used, for example, or announced when the meetings of heads of government take place. But no such announcement has ever been made at such a joint bilateral meeting. So it seems that this was confected in Sri Lanka by the previous government, the government of Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Ranil Wickremesinghe, to give the impression in Sri Lanka that somehow this was something coming from Mr. Modi, when in fact it may not have been at all. This might have just been those leaders trying to paint a picture of being under pressure, under duress from Big Brother India, to give this project to a favored party. It also may have been that they were party to forcing Adani to give a higher price because of some vested interest that they had in these projects. Because again, as I said, it takes two to tango. The Sri Lankan government on the 6th of May 2024 awarded this project to Adani at an outrageous price, having gone through two committees, not all the members of which agreed to sign the committee reports. So obviously there were reservations or some call for explanation as to why that was the case. So there was a problem. And we also need to try and understand the difference in price that we're talking about. The difference between the 4.26 cents per kilowatt hour that was agreed to by the Sri Lankan cabinet last year, and the price at which the present government awarded a tender. By the way, the tender was called at about the same time in May last year that the cabinet approval for Adani was given. So you can't say the two prices came at two different times. They're pretty much simultaneous. Mm-hmm. The difference in price between the 8.26 cents and the 4.65 cents that is now being awarded by the government of Sri Lanka is equivalent to about $72 million a year. And remember, we were signing up with Adani for 26 years. This was a gift that was meant to be given to some corrupt politicians, probably. We don't know. This is a matter for inquiry in the future. For 26 years. And that would amount to almost $500 million. $72 million a year for 26 years is an incredible amount of money. Sri Lanka is a small, relatively poor, virtually officially bankrupt country that cannot afford this. So this was a scheme that may have been there, may have been confected in order to deprive the consumers of Sri Lankan electricity of a reasonable price for the commodity they need to live.
And wind energy should be logically cheaper than coal and electricity from thermal plants or any other conventional source. So there are several petitions in the courts regarding this project. So what happens to those petitions? I believe they were supposed to come up in March. So they are now infructuous. Is that what's going to happen?
So two comments on that. First off, we don't know because the Attorney General will have to make a representation on those matters. The second thing is that on the matters that are before court, obviously I can't comment because they're sub judice. So this is something that we'll have to wait and see how it evolves. In an ideal scenario, I would expect that now that Adani has withdrawn their offer, there is no case to answer, and the cases may be dismissed. But this is ultimately a matter for the courts. And as we know, the Sri Lankan judiciary is independent. We all trust it, and so I think that whether the courts decide to proceed further or not is something that they'll have to decide when they start the hearings next month.
So does this decision by Adani, you think, impact on other projects that the Adani Group has in Sri Lanka? For instance, there is the ports project. And do you think this may impact that in an adverse way? Because I'm hearing that the ports, actually the West Container Terminal, which the Adani Group is developing, is almost ready and finished. So how do you think it might impact that?
I don't believe there'll be any impact there. They have tied up with the John Keel's group in Sri Lanka for this port project, very respectable company. And I think we need to consider these two projects entirely separately. The port project is a done deal. It's in progress, and I hope it performs as well as it's expected to. So that's an important project. The wind energy project, for the reasons I told you, was not. And that's especially why I think that we need to be introspective about this and think, where did Sri Lanka go wrong in negotiating this project? Was it political pressure by local politicians, or was it corrupt officials, or was it just bad management and naivety that led to this outrageous price being concluded last year?
And the other thing, of course, is that wind energy itself does not seem to be high on the new government's list, because President Anura Kumara Dissanayake has spoken about solar energy. And I think when he was visiting Delhi, there was an agreement that the two sides will cooperate in putting up solar energy farms in Sri Lanka. Perhaps I think it was either Trincomalee or somewhere around Trincomalee. So how do you see that? And what do you expect now after this sort of rescinded deal, or if rescinded is not the right word, the deal from which the Adani Group has withdrawn? How would you say that any companies bidding for a solar plant should go about this in Sri Lanka?
So if it is opened to bids at any level, I think that's a good thing. The worry we have to face, and that will always embarrass any government, is when a deal is arrived at without going through a transparent process, a process of calling for tenders, calling for bids, even if bilaterally. You know, Sri Lanka and India have a very intimate relationship. We're not going to get out of the same bed anytime soon. And in that scenario, there is a justifiable cause for the Sri Lankan government to tie up with Indian companies for the provision of energy services, for example. This makes eminent sense from a strategic perspective, and also simply from a political perspective. India now is one of the biggest wind energy and renewable energy producers in the world. The technology is entirely up to date. Indian companies are able to compete with anyone else in order to deliver this. So it makes total sense for Sri Lanka to tie up with India on this, but it should be transparent. We can, for example, even insist, for example, if you call for bids, it doesn't have to be international. We can just bid within India for Indian suppliers of wind energy to compete amongst each other and come to the best prices. The same for solar. There's not just Adani, there are many other companies. Adani might be the biggest, but there are many vendors, suppliers within India who have this technology and who are large-scale producers. So there's no good reason for us not to have transparent procurement in these energy purchase agreements. What always will raise a red flag, however low the price, is if you don't have transparency, because the suspicion will linger that you have agreed to a price that is higher than the market price. So long as President Dissanayake, as he promised before the elections, that energy will be purchased through transparent tender process, so long as he abides by that promise, he is on good ground. But if he has a situation in which he has to sign bilateral power purchase agreements without going through a transparent process, I think he is in grave peril of suffering the reputational shame of his predecessors.
So if Adani Green Energy Company were to theoretically get involved in the solar project in, say, Trincomalee, if that's where it's coming up, there would be no objection from within Sri Lanka against that, against their involvement.
Certainly no objection from me or from anyone else who I think is thinking about this from a rational perspective. So long as we follow the law, the Sri Lankan law requires that we follow, start again. So we have last year a new Electricity Act, and the Electricity Act requires that power purchase agreements be through a transparent mechanism of competitive bidding. So long as that act is abided by and we don't try to subvert the spirit of that act, and so long as the environmental regulations are abided by, why should we object? Sri Lanka needs renewable energy desperately, and it's in our interest, whether it's Mr. Adani or anyone else, to purchase that power at the lowest possible price. That is the challenge before us.
You know, one of the reasons that there seems to have been a rethink in the government of Sri Lanka also, I mean, of course, President Dissanayake, before he became the president, had also, you know, he had said that he is going to cancel the Adani project. But thereafter, after he became president, there was a development in the United States where the Adani, the same company, Adani Green, was actually, you know, there was a case and against them for bribing Indian officials, and there seems to have been a kind of what we call a spin-off of this in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka said it would start reconsidering the Adani projects within, and the Adani wind farm was one of the projects that actually they started looking into after that controversy. So there is a kind of reputational damage to the Adani brand, as it were. Do you think that is going to figure in any future involvement by the company in any power projects, any renewable power projects?
First off, I don't think so. I think I have to correct you a little bit there, because Nirupama, I don't think the Sri Lankan government officially responded to the indictment of Adani Green Energy in the US. Their attitude was that that is a US case and they will watch carefully, but it wasn't going to affect anything that the government decided here. The review of the Adani project, I don't believe had anything to do with the US chain of events. The president himself, in the course of the election campaign, as you pointed out, on numerous occasions, said that he was worried about this deal. He used the term underhand deal on many occasions. He referred to this as an underhand deal. And he said that it should be dealt with transparently. And so I think when he took office, he decided that he would review this case, and that was the proper course to follow. Remember, the previous cabinet had already approved the award to Adani. And then you might wonder, why didn't it take place for all that time? It was awarded, after all, in May of last year. And the current government took office only in November of this year. So there was a long time in which the project could have been signed up, but no power purchase agreement was signed. And I believe the reason for that was because the Director General of the Central Environment Authority refused to give his consent, and the Public Utilities Commission asked to see the government-to-government agreement by which the tender process was not followed, because the government claimed that it was not following a tender process because it was a government-to-government agreement, but they couldn't produce any documentation to support that claim. So because of those kinds of problems, the project was held up and no PPA was eventually signed. And then when President Dissanayake came to office, he decided to review it, and his cabinet went through it and decided to revoke the earlier cabinet decision of President Wickremesinghe, which hadn't been acted on, and instead appoint new committees to review this. So and that decision is maybe 3 weeks ago, so it was quite recent. In the meantime, of course, those of us who have been opposed to this project have been vociferously arguing against it, but at the same time trying to be reasonable, taking the view that so long as such projects are agreed to in a transparent manner and abide by Sri Lankan law, and especially the environmental regulations, we should have no objection to this. And indeed we don't. So I think the US proceedings against the Adani company have very little impact in Sri Lanka. Indeed, there have only been indictments and the cases haven't been heard. And I think I saw in the media this morning that under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, I believe these indictments were issued under that act, that no proceedings will happen in the US now under the act because Mr. Trump has decided that they won't enforce that act. So these cases in New York will probably disappear for that reason. But that has no bearing whatsoever, so far as I know, on the Sri Lankan scenario.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pethiyagoda, for your time and for explaining to us what the opposition to the Adani Green Energy project in Sri Lanka was all about. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.